Today, we're diving into the iconic James Bond franchise, known for its suave spy, thrilling adventures, and glamorous settings. While Bond has been a cultural phenomenon for decades, there are certain aspects of the franchise that, viewed through a modern lens, haven't aged well. Let's explore 10 of these elements. Gender roles. Throughout the series, Bond's relationships with women often reflect outdated gender stereotypes. Female characters are frequently portrayed as damsels in distress or simply as romantic conquests for Bond, rather than fully developed characters with agency. Representation of minorities. The early Bond films have been criticized for their lack of diversity and sometimes stereotypical portrayals of minority characters. Non-white characters were often relegated to supporting roles or depicted through cliched stereotypes. Casual sexism. Bond's attitude towards women can be seen as sexist by today's standards. His casual and sometimes dismissive treatment of female characters reinforces traditional gender norms and objectification. Racial insensitivity. Some Bond films have scenes or lines that perpetuate racial insensitivity or stereotypes, particularly in older films where racial sensitivity was less prevalent. Violence and brutality. The depiction of violence in Bond films has evolved over time, but earlier films often glamorized and trivialized violence. Scenes of physical aggression and torture were sometimes presented without much regard for their impact. Lack of realism. The gadgets and technology depicted in Bond films often stretch the limits of plausibility, contributing to a perception of Bond as more of a superhero than a realistic spy. Treatment of LGBTQ+ characters. Bond films have generally lacked positive representation of LGBTQ+ characters. LGBTQ+ characters, when they appear, are often portrayed in a negative light or as villains. Political incorrectness. Some older Bond films contain elements that would now be considered politically incorrect, such as insensitive jokes or outdated cultural references. Environmental impact. The franchise has been criticized for its depiction of environmental issues, often featuring exotic locations without addressing the environmental impact of Bond's actions or lifestyle. Consumerism and materialism. Bond films have often glorified luxury brands and consumerism, promoting a lifestyle centered around wealth, status, and excess. As we reflect on these aspects, it's important to recognize that the Bond franchise has evolved over time, with more recent films making efforts to address some of these criticisms. However, examining these elements through a modern lens helps us understand how cultural attitudes and values have changed since Bond first hit the screen. What are your thoughts on these observations? Do you think the Bond franchise should continue to evolve to better reflect contemporary values? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more insights into iconic cultural phenomena like the James Bond franchise.